Okay. Also there in the back, could you please take your seats? I know there's a lot to talk about, even before the discussion has started, but hopefully also after. Thank you all for being here. My name is Gerard Oosterwijk from the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. And thank you for being here at this event. It's actually an evening before a conference tomorrow in the European Parliament, but today we organized this with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Competence Center for the Future of Work. As you all know, we have a keynote from Evgeny Morozov, followed also by a keynote of Valeria Pulignano from the KU Leuven, and a reaction by Nicolas Schmit. I heard the commissioner is still on his way, but he's shortly here. As commissioners are, like sometimes it takes a bit more time, but he will be here on time also to hear Evgeny, I heard. So let us start. I want to start with introducing I would say my partner in crime in organizing this conference. There's many people involved and we will thank them at the end. But I think one of the leading forces behind this conference is Justin Nogerede from the FES Competence Center of the Future of Work. Justin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gerard, and welcome. Welcome on behalf, indeed, of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, FEPS, and welcome on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung's Competence Center on the Future of Work. Yes, I know it's a very long name. And also welcome here to the Claridge, which is a bit of an institution in Brussels. It was a former nightclub, so it's also the perfect audience, or the perfect atmosphere, I mean, for the dinner reception that will follow afterwards. But before we go there, let's talk about the program. Because as you know, the title for tonight is Transforming Capitalism in the Age of AI. And putting capitalism in the title of an event in Brussels is perhaps a bit provocative, I would say. So let me explain why we did that, what the focus is of this event, why we set this up. Well, of course, there's a lot of hype and talk about AI. Yeah? AI will kill all the jobs. No, AI will bring about human flourishing and paradise on Earth. No, AI will lead to extinction risks. And I think all of this is empty chatter. What we want to discuss and what we think we should do is look at the development and use of technology in its economic context, in the economic conditions. And those conditions, ladies and gentlemen, spoiler alert, is capitalism. The pursuit of profit and power, the accumulation of profit. And I just said economic conditions and didn't mention political conditions because it's my belief that when we discuss politically where technology should go, the debate is simply not there. What kind of technological society do we want? How do we want to use technology? What kind of technology do we want to develop? We don't actually discuss that. And we leave it to the market, and specifically to firms from Silicon Valley, who have a huge grip over our technological imagination and trajectory. And for me, personally, this has been also a bit frustrating. I worked for years in the European Commission on tech policy, and I have found the debate very limited. We have seen monumental changes with digital technology. It has changed our democracy, how it functions, or perhaps stops to function nowadays. How we socialize, how we work, how we do business. So it's tremendous change. And at the same time, it's also new infrastructures that are being brought about, right? Digital infrastructures that supplant previous public governance systems. We'll talk a lot about the world of work here. And if you take, for instance, online labor platforms that we'll discuss later, we see that the owners of those labor platforms, regulate entire labor markets. They decide who counts as an employer or who doesn't. What kind of rules workers de facto have. Now, it's tremendous power. Now, of course, in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, we've seen a change, right? At European level, for instance, there's much more interest and involvement in tech policy, specifically how to regulate big tech. And we have seen many laws, the AIA, the DSA, the DMA, the DGA, a whole alphabet soup. And I think this is very important and it's good. At the same time, I think it's also limited, because all those laws, or almost all those laws, are still based on an internal market legal basis. They run on an internal market logic. The Commission, the EU, tries to perfect the internal market, make sure there's fair competition, but of course the digital transition is about much more than just consumer issues and market problems. It's, for instance, about the fact that our public sphere is now outsourced to a handful of tech billionaires. And it's about the fact that employers use digital technology as a tool for class domination. By outsourcing work via platforms, by using algorithmic management systems to control workers, and this all for speculative productivity gains. Now, of course, none of this is inevitable, even though it is often presented as such. And so what I would really like to see also with this event and in the future is a more progressive politics around digital technology, because I think that is what we need if we want to change course for the future. And this is about collective action, about public involvement, social concerns. And that is also why we termed our event Transforming Capitalism, because this is about the economic conditions in which technology is being developed. Now, we will also be joined in a second by European Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights, Nicolas Schmit. He's still in negotiations on the Platform Work Directive, and this is actually a great example of the politics that we want. This is about protecting workers in the online world of work, social rights. So it's great that he will be here in a second. But before that, I would really like to introduce our first keynote speaker, Evgeny Morozov. I don't really like the modern fascination or fascination with celebrity and idols, but I am really excited that Evgeny Morozov is here, because I've been following him for years, and he has been a tech historian that has analyzed technological trends in their historical, economic, and political context. And because he has done that, he has been consistently correct about puncturing technological myths around AI, but many things more. For instance, in 2011, when he published his book, The Net Delusion, this was around the same time as the Arab Spring. A lot of people thought that the internet and social media would bring democracy, that the Arab Spring was kind of an example of that. And he pointed out back then already in 2011 that what was much more likely to happen is that digital technology would amplify state power to crush protests, to surveil people. Indeed, that is exactly what happened in, for instance, Egypt. After, he has also criticized what we now call techno-solutionist mindsets, the idea that technology alone will somehow solve our social problems. And again, this is years before we have discussions that we have now around Potemkin AI, snake oil AI, and where we're just in general much more critical about what comes from Silicon Valley. Finally, he's also the founder of the Syllabus, which is an online system for collecting and sharing quality information that is kind of operating on a different logic from our clickbait online attention economy. At FES, we actually use that. We have a digital archive based on that system. It's great. I can recommend it. You can check it out on our website. And now let me go to Evgeny's talk. In June, he wrote an article for the New York Times called The True Threat of Artificial Intelligence, in which he details what we should really look out for when we talk about AI. And spoiler alert, it is not human extinction, at least not yet. Dear Evgeny, please come on stage, and let's also give him a round of applause.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, and thank you for all of you, including the commissioner that I see has just joined us, for being here on this cold December evening. My task for the 20 minutes or so that I have is to convince you that there is, in fact, a distinct progressive way to think about artificial intelligence, and that this distinct progressive way transcends and goes far beyond thinking just about regulating the activities of big corporate players. That remains a very important part of the progressive brief, but it's not the only part. And I think for many of us, it's unclear what the rest of the brief is or should be, in part because we have forgotten what progressivism originally stood for. So if you would indulge me for a few minutes, I just would like to do a very brief kind of philosophical reflection so that we try to recover the original spirit, so to say, and try to see if that spirit of progressivism can help us work out what is to be done about artificial intelligence. So in my reading, which is slightly idiosyncratic and eclectic, progressivism consists of two pillars. Pillar number one is about maximizing the creative capacities of individuals and collectives. It starts by assuming that the human being is essentially an open-ended and unfinished animal, capable of many more things that we can currently imagine. And it's by creating conditions, social, political, cultural, institutional conditions, whereby human beings can maximize that potential and their creative capacities. That means that whatever obstacles stand in the way, tradition, prejudice, bias, hierarchies based on class, exploitative labor traditions, and so forth, all of them have to be removed or tamed so that we can actually reach the maximum of the potential that all of us carry as individuals, but also as groups. But the important part here, of course, is the open-ended nature of it all. That there is no defined maximum, there is no omega point, there is no destination. The destination is always changing, and it's always flexible, and we're always discovering where it is that we are going, both as individuals and as collectives. And the second pillar, somewhat related to the first one, is that progressivism is always agnostic and radically uncertain about the institutional makeup that will help to realize the first pillar. We're not committing ourselves to any particular set of institutions, let alone one institution, in order to enable this maximum deployment and utilization of creative capacities that we as humans have. That's why we keep designing new institutions all the time. If you look at the past few centuries, we have institutions ranging from trade unions, the welfare state, the post office, the library, the university, the museum, various centers for educating workers. All of these institutions exist partly because they serve a certain function in enabling the creative capacities of individuals and collectives, but we can also easily imagine them being replaced by a different set of institutions that will be even better at fulfilling that function. What we don't want to see as progressives is the replacement of all of these institutions and all of this, let's say, experiments with a singular logic, right? Which would be kind of totalitarian in a sense. We want to see the diversity of logics and practices that these institutions reflect. And of course, as you can probably guess, many of these institutions also come to reflect the creative insights that we develop as we experiment in the first pillar. Right? So we deposit the knowledge that we uncover in universities and in libraries, and we basically use these institutions not only to create conditions where workers, let's say, are not exploited, but we also use those institutions to somehow make it easier for people to access knowledge and to build on it as they go about realizing their own mission. So progressivism, as I've just defined it, is in fact resting on these two important pillars. What has happened throughout the Cold War, so in the last 80, 90 years, was something very peculiar. What happened is that a different kind of fake or false progressivism has emerged. We know it mostly as neoliberalism. In its more recent phase, we know it as solutionism, which is the term that I have been using, which basically retains the first pillar of the progressive project, which is all about giving us the creative capacities to experiment and be as creative and resourceful as one can only be, which Silicon Valley represents very well. But it completely forgets and drops the second pillar, which is about the plurality and the agnosticism when it comes to the institutional form. And it essentially celebrates just one institution as the perfect vehicle for delivering this creativity. And that institution, as you may have guessed, of course, is the market, and at the micro scale, it's the corporation or the startup. So in this false progressivism, we essentially get this progressive promise of creativity and self-reinvention, but it always has to be tied to the market as the only vehicle for delivering the goods. Now, during the Cold War, this argument was very easy to make and maintain, in part because the neoliberals who preached this false progressivism found it easy to basically say that the only alternative that we have is between the plan of the central planners sitting in Moscow and the market that's being advocated by the good neoliberals somewhere in Montpellier in Switzerland. This, of course, was a false choice, in part because it completely ignored all these other institutions that I have been mentioning to you before, which took on very important social, cultural, and political functions and had nothing to do with the central plan as we traditionally conceive of it. If you think about the public university or the library system or even the trade union, they are far removed from the world of Soviet apparatchiks and central planning, and still they had very important functions to fulfill. Because of this dichotomy, the false dichotomy between the plan and the market, the neoliberals actually never had to justify the costs of relying on the market and on the company as the vehicle of delivering on these progressive promises. So we never actually looked at how come that the prices of the products that they're selling on the market, for example, are so low. Does it have to do with the power of companies vis-a-vis labor? Does it come with us not accounting for the environmental costs? Does it have to do with the way in which companies and big companies find it easier to, for example, appropriate knowledge, even if they are violating various IP laws, as now is happening with a lot of AI companies, than smaller players, right? This power dimension to how the price is set on the market has always been ignored, in part because the neoliberals never had to defend the market. It was enough to point to the plan and say the plan is bad, so the market is all we've had. Because of the hegemony, let's say, of the neoliberal position in this debate, a lot of the progressive movements and parties and trade unions, they have internalized the terms of the debate. As a result, they have come to accept that, in fact, the market is the better vehicle for delivering many of the goods, and that the only thing that we can do is to humanize the market. So we can regulate it better, we can make sure that the companies don't violate the rules, but we are not going to do much on creating the institutions that we have been creating throughout centuries, whose task it was precisely to facilitate this innovation happening in society at large. And you can see that playing out very well in the debate we're now having about that we're having now about AI, where the default progressive position is to basically say that, well, the corporate sector delivers to us the AI that's the best that's possible. They might be doing it bending certain rules and regulations. So what we have to do is to make sure that we actually tightly control them, and then they do it within the purview of the law. But there is absolutely no effort that I see to actually start going beyond the regulating and humanizing the market agenda and try to think in terms of institutions. What kind of institutions do we need to develop so that we can actually ensure that individuals and groups not only flourish, but that the knowledge and the innovation and the new practices that they generate become, so to say, sedimented and becomes deposited in this institutional landscape. Now, if you think about the way I defined the first pillar of the progressive project, you will see that from the very beginning, you can go back to the times of the French Revolution. In a way, it was all about creating artificial intelligence, right? It was not the artificial intelligence of computers, but it was about creating artificial rules, and artificial, I mean man-made here, not artificial in that bad or somehow inorganic, but it was all about creating man-made rules and regulations and institutions so that you can maximize intelligence in society. So in a certain way, the progressive project from the very beginning has been about building institutions of artificial intelligence, which of course was not naive about the role that humans play in it. Artificial intelligence in this view is always about somehow building the institutional environment in which humans who possess a brain, who possess a body, who possess many other important organs can fully exercise their creativity and intelligence. And it's by being informed through that logic, by being informed by that earlier philosophy of progressivism as an institutionalized artificial intelligence, that we need to re-examine what is to be done with AI. Because ultimately, if you accept this longer-term vision and longer-term revisionist history that I'm giving you, it's obvious that the task of maximizing intelligence in society will always have to involve a mix of infrastructures, institutions, technologies, and people who would need to interact in one way or another, who would need to somehow produce knowledge, and that knowledge would need to be distributed, packaged, and made accessible. But it would not be about thinking that we can just delegate this task to a bunch of technology people who will try to come up with some kind of a perfect algorithm or a perfect large language model, and they will be able to solve the tasks of humanity once and for all. In part because the progressive project doesn't accept that finality from the beginning, because we start by assuming that, as I've said, the human being is an open-ended and unfinished animal, and there is no finality to our purposes, and these purposes can only be discovered, discussed, and deliberated in an open-ended public debate. And if that's the starting point of our inquiry into alternative artificial intelligence systems, it's obvious that the emphasis that we should be putting should go towards inventing institutions that will be as ambitious in their vision as the welfare state of the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s, or perhaps even as ambitious for its time as the French encyclopedia when it was first put together. Right? These are the right reference points for us, because in a way they show that this task ahead is fully and thoroughly institutional, and it's not just about creating technologies or server farms or putting billions into training the next generation of technologists and engineers, all of which, of course, are very important functions, but that would not be a distinctly progressive artificial intelligence. It will just be an artificial intelligence that you can easily integrate into the ongoing neoliberal solutionist project and deepen all of the processes of privatization and financialization that we already dislike. Now, as I reach the end of these remarks, let me make a brief excursus into the history of artificial intelligence as it has been kind of discussed by academia. Those of you who've studied the history of AI, you might know that there has always been a debate within the discipline between, that is not unlike the debate that has been happening in economics, where on the one hand, there were people arguing that to design a perfect AI system, you need to have rules, you need to have essentially algorithms, you need to be able to specify a lot of things in advance, not unlike the way you would need to specify a lot of things in a Soviet plan if you were to design an economy, right? And those were people like Newell and Simon and Minsky and to some extent Papert. All of them were working with the paradigm of, let's say, symbolic AI, where the focus was on creating rules and on creating fully specified systems which would contain a full representation of what the world is like, which, again, is not unlike the way some Soviet economists imagine how planning would look like under the Soviet system. Juxtaposed and opposed to that vision, of course, were always people like Frank Rosenblatt, who built the perceptron, who himself had been partly influenced, as it happens, by Friedrich Hayek, who was not just an economist but also a psychologist, who basically said that we don't need to build a full representation of the world. We can have emerging rules. We can have kind of insights being built as the system interacts with the world. It can build a model, a picture of the world out there, and it can constantly refine it as it interacts with the environment. This, of course, as you will follow my analogy, is very close to how neoliberal economists justify the working of the price system, where you have entrepreneurs who, by means of the market, are testing out different models of reality, and in the end, it's the price system that pulls all of those models into a kind of a singular view without having to utilize all the knowledge that everybody in the system has, right? It's enough to have those people acting on those insights. You don't actually need to know what it is that they know. It's just enough to read their behavior, which of course translates in a way to the way in which large language models work today. They don't start by building a complex representation of the world. They rather build it from the bottom up in particular cases whenever that is actually needed. Both of these models, in a way, were criticized in the 1980s by a very interesting duo of Terry Winograd, who rebelled from the world of symbolic AI and left it behind, having been one of its stars, and Fernando Flores, who some of you might know was actually Minister of the Economy and Finance under Salvador Allende's government in Chile, and then became a very prominent figure in Silicon Valley. And they basically argued that the symbolic AI model is broken, and the other model is still uncertain whether it can get us where we need to get. So what they proposed instead was to focus on building systems of coordination. They built a software called the Coordinator, but the whole point of their project was that intelligence happens as humans interact with technology and as they interact with each other. And if the real goal is building and maximization of intelligence, what we should be focusing on is on building better systems of social coordination between people so that they can actually develop new practices, they can develop new norms, they can develop new products, they can develop new forms of infrastructure, but the point is to give them the tools so that they can come together and form a partnership of some kind. They, of course, managed to see their agenda realized, because one of Terry Winograd's students was Larry Page, who then went on and applied the system and formed Google. And Google went on to give us the online calendar and the online email system and many of the other services for social coordination that all of us are using every day. Where I think that initial critique went wrong was in formulating this alternative third path, this alternative third way, strictly through the paradigm of software. They didn't perceive institutions as also capable of facilitating social coordination. But ultimately, that's what institutions are, right? If you look at most public institutions in society, whether it's the post office or the library or the university or many of the other examples I've given you before, their primary task is facilitating coordination among people and institutions, among people and knowledge bases, but social coordination is at the heart of what they do. And the reason why I went on this detour into thinking about institutions is that, as through the paradigm of the history of AI, is that it's obvious that in this day and age, we cannot just be building alternative free software products to match those that Silicon Valley is building. This is nice, but I think those thinking about this through the paradigm of digital commons are probably getting a little bit closer to the right answer, because digital commons implies not just the passive use of infrastructures, it means active care and maintenance of them. It means an actual involvement in an infrastructure as an institution, as opposed to just passive use of it and you forget about it after you've extracted from it whatever that it is that you want. And it's obvious that if the path that the progressives would like to follow is neither that of the market AI or decentrally planned AI, then the alternative that I think is consistent with their own philosophy and with their ideology is that of an institutionally mediated AI that would facilitate social coordination. And that would be social coordination for perhaps the provision of public services. Perhaps it would be for reinventing welfare institutions. Perhaps it would be for facilitating and getting people away from the kind of alienation that they feel about politics and the civic life. But ultimately, an answer to a properly distinct need for properly socialist or social democratic progressive AI, I think has to start with recognizing that it's a deeply political mission. And the deeply political mission has to return to the roots of progressivism as something that is about allowing people to reach the maximum of their potential in a socially mediated and institutionally mediated environment, and to do it in a way that doesn't solely rely on the market as the only institution capable of getting them there. Right? And I think it's very important, and we'll hear later today about the costs of relying on the market for facilitating delivery work and many other things. I mean, these costs, we have to account for them, but as we account for them, I think it's time that we also start developing alternatives. But to develop these alternatives, I do think that a proper examination of our own project is needed. And I do think that trying to think about this through the lens of a massive push to build digital commons as a hybrid ground between infrastructures and institutions that societies and groups can be using to coordinate their own activities outside of the market as the only reference point would be a step in the right direction. So thank you very much. I hope we'll have a productive debate afterwards. Thanks. Get off stage.
All right, that was a great talk. I heard a lot that we'll probably come back to in the discussion. I heard social infrastructures, public infrastructures for social coordination. A pet peeve of mine is platforms for the public good, for instance, right? Why rely on Uber, which sucks 30% on each transaction out of local economies? Why can things like that not be publicly provided, for instance? But anyway, I will stop here. I also heard you mentioned institutions, a big focus on institutions other than the market. Here I'm thinking, for instance, of unions. And that also brings me to our second keynote speaker, Valeria Pulignano. She's a professor at the KU Leuven Institute, the Institute for Sociological Research. And she's been focusing and has been a prolific author on the platform economy, workers' rights in the digital economy, worker voice, and much more, algorithmic management, for instance. And perhaps important to mention is also that she decided and accepted very gracefully to join us here tonight, very last minute, on very short notice. So a big applause for Valeria Pulignano, please.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. And in fact, very last notice, but I try to do my very best and to think upon, some kind of reflections about, well, not really artificial intelligence per se, but particularly the relevance of technology and digital technologies for work. This is what I normally do in my day-by-day work. I'm a labor scholar with also, in fact, a kind of attention and very much dedication to labor issues. And since the last, let's say, years, have been conducting, in fact, quite a lot of research, I would say, cross-nationally on digital platforms, labor platforms particularly, who try to kind of match demand with supply without taking much of the responsibilities of the labor consequences that this kind of matching might create in the market. Well, before going into a bit of reflection around what does it mean, working on platforms or through platforms for workers and workers' voice, particularly, and rights of workers. And so draw some kind of critical reflections about that. Let me start from a premise, from a labor sociological, perhaps, perspective. Let me do that, which is, I think, quite also in line with a progressive way of thinking about labor. So we don't have, I think, to forget, before we jump into technology and thinking about digital technology, we don't have to forget that work under capitalism, and also digital capitalism, I would say, is a story of employers' attempts to control labor and to guarantee and enhance profitability. And in fact, a disciplined labor force is induced to work more productively for longer. And I would say that this is an interesting statement because today, in our market, in the market, globally speaking, there are forces, political forces, social, economic forces, which pretend to push in a different direction, presenting workers within the digital market economy as free and autonomous from hierarchical structures of control and class-based, I would say. Now, the question is this really true? Now, from what I've been kind of investigating and looking at since last years, I would say that to me, this looks a bit not really true, in the sense it looks a bit kind of utopian, and it is a kind of very complex and contradictory issues. And I would like to provide some examples, if you allow me, to kind of illustrate why I say that this kind of statement about the freedom and the autonomy of workers providing services, particularly through digital labor platforms, is in fact much more complex than what it looks like. Let me start from an example from my own country, Italy, where almost, well, more than a year ago, actually, was in 2021, the Italian legislator considered the algorithm called Frank, which was developed by one of the most important and famous, I would say, food delivery platforms nowadays in the market, Deliveroo, considered this kind of algorithm discriminatory, as it aimed at allocating orders in alignment to the exercise of management control at the expense of workers' social rights. At that time, when the legislator was actually saying this, the, at that time, Confederal Secretary of one of the major trade unions confederation in Italy, the most progressive one, CGL, Tania Sacchetti, commented, "This is an epochal turning point in the conquest of workers' and trade union rights and freedoms in the digital world." And probably she was, I would say, right. So the case of Deliveroo, let's say, of course, shows that this, the riders, which are in fact delivering pizzas and food through the platform, are far from being free and also far from being autonomous workers. Why do I say this? Because the question is, we should ask why, in fact, and what was at the core of the decision of the Italian legislator at that time when he, in fact, considered this algorithm being discriminatory. Now, at the core of the Italian legislator, there was, in fact, the kind of awarenesses that when it wants, the platform can remove the blindfold that makes it blind to the reasons for the rider's failure to perform. Thus, by considering the anti-discrimination regime to be applicable, the legislator in Italy at that time has recognized the rights of the riders not to be discriminated against in access to work, but also the right of the trade unions at the time to seek protection on their behalf. And this is quite important. Now, the question is to say, is this only the story of Deliveroo? No, it's not only the story of Deliveroo. unfortunately. There are a lot of platforms out there, particularly in the transport sector, and not only. I could mention some: Glovo, Uber Eats, and many others, which kind of illustrate similar kind of stories because they operate in the same kind of way. And, you know, I've been involved, I think it was last year almost, there was an interesting study also commissioned and done by FEPS on these retails and dark stores. And in fact, what we see also there is that supply chains consisting of retailers employ food delivery platforms, belong to the same category, and consequently, they produce the same effects that Deliveroo actually produced. This is because the retailers use food delivery platforms as their logistic tool for providing quick and, I would say, also precarious and underpaid, unpaid work or delivery services as they key for unfair competitive advantage. Now, just to move on with these examples, we've been actually it was last year, we have been conducting some scoring of platforms in the platform economy here in Belgium at KU Leuven with the support of very committed young researchers. And what are the results of the story and the study that we have been conducting are quite interesting. Now, we have been scoring 6 platforms across different sectors, so not only food delivery, transport, but also care provisions, and more generalist services like gardening, tutoring, teaching, whatever you might want to think upon, all based here in Belgium. And we have been scoring them on the base of 5 principles of FAIR, which is a global network which operates across different countries, and we all use this kind of principle to score platforms. Now, these 5 principles are fair pay, fair conditions, fair contracts, fair management, and fair representations. And platforms, let me say a little bit about the technicality, they receive a score between 1 and 10 points, depending on, you know, how good they score based on this kind of 5 principles. Now, what I can tell you is that the results of the scoring are quite shocking. Just to tell some, 2 out of the 6 platforms that we have been investigating guaranteed at least the minimum wage after costs, and none of these platforms could guarantee the local living wages. Only 1 out of the 6 platforms offered opportunities to workers to mitigate tasks' specific risks, for example, providing effective health and safety nets. 3 out of the 6 platforms provided clear and transparent terms and conditions, with only 2 of those platforms offering contracts that do not exclude them from liability. 2 out of the 6 platforms were able to evidence a system of due process for management decision affecting workers, with only 1 of these 2 that could evidence as equity in the management process. And none, 0 of those 6 platforms could show evidence of systems able to assure freedom of association and guarantee the expression of collecting workers' voice. This is, I think, quite problematic, at least from, you know, the side of workers, and quite worrying. Just to carry on the story, after that we have been actually doing also other studies, particularly looking at care platforms in a kind of cross-national context in Belgium with other mature market economies in Europe, where we see governments, national governments, and social partners have been quite active in trying to kind of regulate care service provision in the market by moving, in fact, care services from, let's say, a situation of informality to a situation of formality. What we could observe, so how these care platforms enter the market, you know, of services in these countries. Well, what we could actually see here is that we could see basically that via the digital rules, platforms use some sort of strategies to kind of pursue what we call regulatory compliance and regulatory disruptions of the kind of welfare systems which are available at the national level. And these are strategies that they pursue, and I'm not gonna in detail going and telling more about it. They actually are aimed at providing what these platforms aim at achieving in the market, which is in fact dominance in the market. We could see also a lot of similarities across the countries that we have been looking at about the way in which platforms they operate. What we could also see is that the consequences that this way of operating on care platforms has on workers is quite problematic, in the sense that we see a lot of individualization of risk, if you like, in terms of cost that are in fact shifted on the shoulder of the workers. And here when we talk about cost, we are talking about different things. We talk about costs that people have to support by accessing work through these platforms. We look at costs that people have to support by performing work through these platforms or on these platforms. And also, very interesting enough, which is a kind of characteristic of care, care is always seen as very, involving a lot of emotions, feelings that people, carers, they bring when they do their own work. We see, in fact, a lot of problematic issue here with emotions and feelings of those workers, because those workers, in most of the situation, actually told us that they were, subject to situation of scams, situation of harassment, which was caused, in fact, by platform algorithm steering the matching without monitoring the modalities of the matching itself. For instance, workers are often left alone to kind of figure out the safety of a prospective gig, leading to them taking cautionary measures against the potential dangers with which they are confronted with. And much of this risk, in fact, is due to the opaque digital environment and low degree of moderation, which is done by the platform. So what are the policy, let's say, or the kind of, little bit of recommendation that we dig under that, or we kind of see as being important coming through from our study? Well, certainly there is a lack of enforcement of existing regulations on platforms. And this is the major driver of this individualization of risk and the costs which is associated to that. So what we basically argue in our research is that this not enforcement that has enabled platforms to carve out a share of the market through their domination strategies is something which needs to be looked at. So these suggest the need to expand and apply existing regulations also in care services to platforms in order to improve the working conditions of the workers, but also, and this is quite interesting, it needs governments nationally to regulate care services which are also not yet regulated. For example, babysitting in Belgium needs to be also looked at quite carefully. And of course, there is also necessity to act through collective agreements, establishing minimum working conditions in domestic care, a lot of also strategies by the unions to organize as well in this particular setting in order to boost workers' bargaining power and improve the working conditions when negotiating with employers, in this case, particularly the platform. Now, I know I don't have much time, so perhaps how I'm going to go with the time, is it okay? Yeah? Okay, so perhaps I would like to start now and move on a little bit and bring some reflections also in the light of the recent under discussion European directive on platform work. Well, certainly what comes out of a lot of our research and also other research developed in the field is that there is a need to reinforce workers' voice in digital setting by strengthening collective bargaining rights, information and consultation rights in both the Artificial Intelligence Act, where there is absolutely nothing about that, but also the European Directive on Platform Work, where we see also that there is a scope for reinforcing and kind of establishing, introducing information and consultation rights. Not only at the national level, but also the European level. At the European level, we do have interesting legislation. We do have what we actually have a European law which covers information and consultation rights for workers in companies. for example, the so-called European Works Council. So the question would be to say, why not to think upon the introduction of European Works Council, the constitution also of European Works Council in digital setting, because in fact these platforms operate, let's say, also as a firm, even though sometimes, you know, payment don't go through the platform and they pretend not to be labor platforms. If we look a bit more into the European directive, I would also very briefly say that perhaps we need also to be attentive about the risk that I see in the directive nowadays to perhaps deepen the binary divide in the protection of employees, which is very good, you know, reclassification of employment, okay, so I leave it here, and self-employment, and raises concern whether a platform will not in fact utilize the genuine self-employment status to foster unfavorable changes in working conditions for the self-employed, the real self-employed, while the latter are left unprotected. And here I would like to close to say we need also to think about the real self-employment and not only about the reclassification of the bogus self-employment into employees, but we need to think about self-employment really and try there to find ways to avoid the platform then could, let's say, exploit also these kind of field, because we don't need to forget about the fact that the labor market is quite flexible in the sense we do have a lot of third status provisions, peer-to-peer status here in Belgium, civil law in Poland, parasubordinati in Italy. So the structures are there, and you know they can be used in a kind of a not favorable way for workers and workers' rights by digital platforms. Thank you very much, and looking forward for the discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much, Valeria, for great insights into the world of work. Evgeny mentioned the importance of institutions, and I think Valeria really showed what happens, what the risks are if you rely on institutions from the US that actually don't have a system with workers' rights. That creates certain outcomes that I think we'll discuss also in the panel discussion. You also mentioned a lot of policy recommendations, and I'm very happy that Commissioner Schmit, the Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights, has also arrived and will join the discussion later. But before we go there, I would like to introduce the moderator for the panel discussion that will follow. John Thornhill from the Financial Times. He's the innovation editor. He's also very tuned in and follows closely what happens on tech policy on the continent here in Europe, and also follows like innovation, startups. So he's the perfect man to discuss, to lead the panel and the discussion for where to go next. So please, John.
All right. Thank you very much, Justin, for the introduction. I wonder if I could ask my panel to join us, please. So Commissioner Schmit, would you care to join us? And also Evgeny and Valeria, if you could come back. So welcome. So I'm going to fire some questions to the panel up here, but we have some great experts in the room, and I'm very keen to bring you in to the discussion in just a minute. But I'm going to start with you, Mr. Commissioner. You are, you have been a commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights since 2019, I believe. You're a former Minister for Labour, Employment and Immigration in Luxembourg and a former MEP. And I noticed that in your answers to the European Parliament before taking up your role, you were talking about the fact that you were going to focus very much on the 100 million people at risk of poverty or social exclusion. And you were also going to focus very much on the 28 million people working on digital platforms across the EU and gig workers. And you were calling for human-centric technology as well. So can you tell us, first of all, can you respond to the provocations of the two speakers that we had? And then tell us, over the past 4 years, what do you think you have accomplished?
So thank you very much indeed. I think that for progressives, obviously, we are going through a disruptive period in terms of technology, but also with the risk that what has been built up in terms of social rights is under threat. I think this is an important thing we have really to take into account. And that's why I consider that organizing this kind of conference now, at the moment where we are, there is a trilogue taking place just this moment on AI, on how we should regulate AI, but there are trilogues taking place also on the famous platform directive, which was already mentioned, is absolutely important. And I think that Europe has here an important role to play, because if we are not playing it, well, we leave this new economy to, as it was said, to some kind of market philosophy. When you discuss with the platforms, they use that, well, it's the market, and the market needs flexibility. The market doesn't need any rules or regulation. And the more you are regulating, the more you are hampering, finally, not just the developing of the market, but also the development of technology. And that's one of the big issues now for Europe. We organized 3 weeks ago from my department, the DG, a conference on artificial intelligence. And one of the questions I was asked all the time was, well, is Europe not good at regulating, but not very good at developing technologies? And this is an issue, and I think we should be good at developing technologies. Perhaps here we missed some occasions and some opportunities, but that's not because we are over-regulating. That's perhaps because our economic system is not so good at fostering startups and so on. But now the danger is that because some think that we have to close the gap, we should give up regulation. And even now there is a discussion, should we regulate or should we just leave regulation to the companies themselves? And should we just say, well, there should be auto-regulation? And I say it very clearly, there cannot be auto-regulation. You cannot leave the regulation to those who finally want to dominate the markets and dominate also those who are working. So that's the first point. And I think it's possible to combine regulation and development of new technologies and also new activities. Now, coming back to what has been said on the platform, I share what you have said, 90%. What we try now to do is to bring these platforms in the normal framework. Because initially, I think that the idea was the platform, thanks to algorithm, because we always have to rely that to the artificial intelligence, and algorithms offer the possibility, finally, to circumvent the normal regulations, the normal rules we have put into place for the world of work. And that's what happened with Uber, that's happened with many others. We thought that it was just food deliveries and transport. Now it has now invaded many other services and many other activities. And if we are not really now regulating this, this will finally invade all kinds of enterprises and sectors. Because if I am a businessman, if I am an enterprise, and I notice that I can finally escape all kinds of regulation, all kinds of social rules, all kinds of contributions I have to pay by creating, by outsourcing to a platform certain activities, well, I will do it. And this will be done. This is already done by companies saying, well, we outsource and we create a platform. And this is the beginning of the end of a social welfare system, of a social protection system, of also the recognition of the value of work. And finally, what happens now is the institutionalization of precariousness. And this is, I think, a big danger. This is a big issue, because that means more and more we have precarious work. And this has to be stopped. And that's what we try. Now, perhaps not sufficiently, with some difficulty, but you know, Europe is always a big compromise. You always have to deal with compromises. And what we are trying now to do with the platform directive is at least set a certain number of rules and say, well, it's not just to say you are all freelancers and you have to work as freelancers. No, this is objectively not the case. Well, it happens that this afternoon I had a meeting with a platform who is not working with freelancers. And they have developed as a big platform. So it works also with a platform and people who get social rights, who are employees and who have social protection and who have at least collective agreements and or at least minimum wages. So it's not that the platform has to function a certain way and cannot way differently. And this is now, I think, the big debate for progressives, where really it's a fight, not just for the Ubers and the deliverers. It's a fight for the general framework of our labor markets and our labor systems. If we miss this occasion, well, we enter into really disruptive and difficult times.
You were talking there about the EU AI Act that's obviously in the trilogue at the moment. To your mind, what is the most important principle that you think needs to be defended?
Well, the AI Act is not really dealing with the world of work. The AI Act is more dealing with what are the major risks AI may create for the consumer. What should AI products guarantee in terms of protections and preventing risks? That's the essence of the AI Act. And I think this is a very important element. We should not discuss now, is AI taking over the world? And is AI at the end destroying humankind? This is what Mr. Musk is telling us. Perhaps he tells us that in order to make us forget the very concrete and precise issues we are confronted with AI. What is now important is precisely what are the risks, the very concrete risks. I am a very great fan of Shoshana Zuboff's book of Surveillance Capitalism. And this shows how the power is now belongs to a few companies, finally, a few major companies, be it Google or Meta now, Google, Facebook, and some others. And I think this is already a very monopolistic capitalism based on data. Who is controlling data? Who is abusing data? Who is taking my data to make a big business out of it? And I think this is a risk, and this is an issue we really have to sort out. And we have started also at the European level, a bit late probably, I would say, to deal with the essence of the new economy, which are data. And here Europe has, I think, missed the first data revolution. Hopefully we will not miss the second one.
All right, we have been talking very much about containing AI and the threats of AI, but I'd like to shift the debate on a bit to the opportunities and the point that Evgeny was making about the institutions that we need to maximize the creative possibility of doing this. So to your mind, in response to Evgeny's challenge, what are the new institutions that we need to create? Do we need to adapt the existing ones, or do we need to come up with a wholly new institutional architecture?
Well, I'm not a techno-pessimist or refusing. I think the progressives never have been basically anti-technology. It's the question how I use technology and who are the beneficiaries of new technologies. And I think this is the big issue. Who are the beneficiaries? If introducing AI means that I can alleviate the workload, if I can avoid certain times of certain forms of work, very repetitive forms of work, if I can improve working conditions, if I can improve medical, all related to medical, well, these are very positive things and very good opportunities. That's the first element. The second one is, if AI, which I believe also is increasing fundamentally productivity in our economies, and I think especially for an aging society like the European society, the big issue is how we can increase productivity with an aging population and a reduced population. Maybe AI helps us to do so. Well, then the question comes up, who are the winners? How are these productivity gains distributed? And then we are back to capitalism and the rules of capitalism. Either we have a social market economy, a social capitalism, where indeed the productivity is shared equally between the workers and capital, or we are in a system where these profits are concentrated in the hands of the owners. And this is the big issue on introducing this. We invited an economist, the winner, Pizarrides, and he said, well, I believe that we will have a lot of productivity gains through AI, and this perhaps changes the world of work in a way Keynes dreamed of, which was, well, in this famous letter to our grandchildren, that we work less, we have better working conditions, and the gains are distributed in an equal way. But this means that we have strong institutions, that we have strong unions, we have strong collective agreements, we have rules to finally decide how AI is introduced and governed and managed. This is then the big challenge for progressives.
Okay, Evgeny, can I get you to respond to your own challenge? What are the new institutions we need to create?
Sure. I mean, look, the proposal from Silicon Valley, from OpenAI and the likes, is that we should essentially centralize control over the world's knowledge in their hands, and they will spend billions of dollars, which we might also need to subsidize, in order to potentially create a system smarter than a human. To which I respond, we already have 7-8 billion humans out there, and we'll have more. They're already smart enough. Why can't we design institutions that will take advantage of their already existing intelligence and rather challenge the money we are going to give to these companies, to these people, and do that without centralizing knowledge in the hands of the likes of Elon Musk? That seems to me a rather sensible proposition, which would require a number of institutions to be built. But it would also start by defining intelligence not as something that is represented in technologies, but as something that is a property of humans interacting with each other and interacting with technologies. And if we start from this assumption, that it's obvious that the current system doesn't allow us to develop these institutions. It doesn't allow us to develop this intelligence system, so to say, to the maximum. Because it runs and it's built and it's centered on just one institution for centralizing and distributing intelligence, and that system is the market. You know, in the famous essay that Friedrich Hayek wrote, The Use of Knowledge in Society, which every neoliberal thinker, you know, reads every morning when they wake up, you know, if you read it carefully, its whole point is about the non-use of knowledge in society. It basically tells that the market works remarkably well by not utilizing knowledge, because you kind of can understand what needs to be done. You know, if you see that, you know, the price of cobalt or something has risen, you know what the response should be. You don't need to know why it has happened. You don't need to know whether it's caused by climate change or a war or civil disturbance of some kind. You don't need to know any of that. You just need to respond. Price has risen, sell, right? And it's a system that delivers the goods occasionally, but it delivers the goods at the price of ignorance, right? We are becoming more and more ignorant as the world gets more and more complex. So it's against that background that I insist on the need to create new institutions that will allow us to actually take advantage of knowledge, take advantage of, you know, causal thinking, trying to think in terms of cause and effect, try to understand why things happen, and try to do something about it, which to me is at the heart of the progressive project.
All right.
So I think we are kind of shooting below, like we're punching below our weight here when we think that the only thing we can do is just to accept this market-produced, market-generated AI and then somehow to clean up afterwards, right? To make sure that these companies don't go too far. No, we have to be bold, and we have to try to invent new institutions like the library, like the encyclopedia, like the university, like many of the other institutions we invented, that will allow us to maximize intelligence of the humans instead of trying to replicate it with machines.
All right, this is a characteristically brilliant analysis of what's going on, but I want to get more specific. What are the new libraries and universities that we need to create? Can you be more specific about imagining what are these new institutions?
Sure, but I mean, I can give you a lot of banal examples. I mean, our entire academic system, despite all the money that we give to universities, all the public money that goes into research, relies on Google Scholar as the central piece of discovery of new academic literature being published. I don't think that this is smart. And I think that Google, they're not making any money with Google Scholar. For them, it's a vanity project. In our entire kind of academic field, is a hostage to an American corporation. I mean, so if I had to reinvent the university, if I had to reinvent the library, I would start there. But there are plenty of systems and plenty of processes out there that all of us are engaged with that we can make better if we were to build them on the logic of the digital commons or on the logic of public infrastructures.
Valeria, could I get you also to respond to this challenge? I mean, what, from a kind of labor market perspective, are the kind of new institutions we need to help defend employees' rights, or do we just need to enforce the existing regulations that we have, do you think?
Well, I think that the two things do complement each other in the sense that we do have, in fact, a lot of institutions at the national level, at the European level, and so we need to make that, enforceable also for the digital kind of, let's say, companies, right? In that sense, I would also say that, at least my point of view is that there is no, we talk about platforms and we talk about digital platforms, but these digital platforms operate in sectors, and we need to re-embed them in those sectors, transport, care, whatsoever. And we need to create the structures there where, these platforms are operating in a kind of more generalistic way. The freelancing at the very moment are really, operating through platforms are facing a lot of challenges. They lost autonomy. They don't have capacity to establish their own prices because there is a market, a competitive market out there, which doesn't allow them to be competitive. So we need to recreate the conditions for them to be competitive. And this means, in fact, as in industrial relations, we used to say, before you regulate the labor market, you need to regulate the market. Otherwise, you don't create the conditions also for regulating the labor market. And unions will face a lot of difficulties if we don't have a market which is, allowing them to enter. I also do think, so that's one thing. The other thing I want to say is that, going back to the issue of the human interactions, in fact, there is human interaction, and the governance of artificial intelligence is a matter of, human interactions. So this means that we need to govern the system. How do we govern the system? We need to create structures for making somebody accountable. The algorithm cannot be an accountable person. And this is not something I say from a sociological perspective. There are labor lawyers talking about this. So we need to re-embed the human face of artificial intelligence, which seems to be something technicalities there. And, we use always to say, we have to avoid technological determinism. So we need to make that happening, really, in order to then make possible, and I completely agree with the Commission to say, we need, in fact, if there are increasing productivity, then to recuperate that increase in productivities through this kind of system. To me, this means, of course, increasing wages and working conditions, which is the first thing we need to do to avoid that people really are kind of, embedded in a system and working continuously just because they don't have ends meet, basically. And so that's the reason why they go on.
All right, I'm going to open it up to the audience very soon, but Commissioner, I want to come back to you on this institutional issue as well. How do you think of this? I mean, I hear a lot of kind of proposals about how you can build kind of public capacity to exploit artificial intelligence for the kind of communal good, whether it's building kind of national research clouds, developing kind of public cloud computing capability to enable universities to develop models or test models on the scale that they are doing in Silicon Valley at the moment, whether it's creating a sovereign wealth fund of healthcare data. We're having this debate in Britain at the moment about whether you can create a kind of public good of the healthcare data that can be used for research purposes and medical treatments and so on. rather than actually, as we appear to be doing, enabling Palantir to run a lot of the kind of data infrastructure in the UK. What do you think? Can you kind of stretch your imagination? What are the new institutions we need?
Well, it's clear, and I fully agree, if we leave this to the big private companies from Silicon Valley, especially you referred to medical issues. Well, they know very well that this is a fantastic market. This is a fantastic way to make enormous money for research, but also for, for insurance companies, they are interested, and so on and so forth. And this goes beyond the economic issue. It goes also deep into the issue of free societies. I think this is something we really have to look at, how far we, with this power through algorithms, concentrated also in some big companies, even if there are now more and more smaller ones, but we know at the end the smaller ones will be eaten by the big ones. That's what happens all the time. It's a question of our free society. We have seen what happened with Cambridge Analytica. This is the political issue, how you can use political data, and so we need structures and institutions controlling and and bringing in limitation. And this, I fully agree, cannot be auto-regulation, because if you have one objective, which is making money, being as profitable as possible, well, if you are auto-regulating yourself, you will never choose auto-regulation against your profitability. You will always first look at profitability before regulation. So I think this is not possible. So we have really to, I'm not very gifted in technological issues, but we really have to build up the safeguards and the institutions which limit certain abuses which already exist and which are going very, very, very fast. So I think Europe has to show, but Europe alone is not enough. When we are talking about platforms, and we had the discussion recently in the trilogue, we discussed about, well, the click workers, the click worker. When we talk about platforms, we think about the guy on his bike bringing the pizza. No, the real platform work is taking place already somewhere else. It's about millions and millions of people working on platforms. And here we have created not a European labor market. We are already in the perspective of a global labor market. So how do we regulate a global labor market where the Indian engineer is competing with the French engineer, or with the British engineer, or with the Swedish engineer, and so on, with standards, prices, remuneration, which have nothing in common. And this is a big issue. I discussed this issue with the Director General of ILO, and he is very aware of that. And we need really some kind of international conventions regulating this global platform. Who is controlling the global platform? Amazon, for instance. Not only Amazon with the Mechanical Turk. That's a platform, global, functioning at a global level. So I think we need now, and it's time, we have to do it now, also having a better dialogue with the US. They try now, especially in competition, they try now to say, well, is it acceptable that these big, becoming always bigger companies can even become bigger? So there is a competition now, initiative, at least under this administration. We will see, hopefully it will continue. So I think these are issues we have to sort out, not only at the European level. It's important to do it. I think we can set also standards at European level, but also at the international level.
It's interesting that, I think when I talk to American policymakers, they feel as though Europe jumped on the GDPR and the data revolution, and they were the ones who set the global norms, and that they don't want that to happen with AI, that there will be more engagement. Whether we're actually going to get any regulation is another matter, but there we go. Right, questions from the audience, please. Yes, the lady at the back.
Is it working? Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this event and everything which has been said. I'm an active citizen. I'm a senior active citizen, and I would like to point out that when we speak about workforce, we should not forget that former workforce people can give a lot of time, motivation to participate not as a worker, but as a senior worker. And I wonder if these people are sufficiently taken in account when it comes to action, when it comes to support. Baby boomers are very numerous, and they will be very actually affected by IA in their daily life. So it's a militant kind of speech that I make. Not forget these people, that they can support and be active. And I don't know, politics is not that fashionable, I see, among people and so on. But trade unions could then take in account that people can support them.
Okay.
I will go get some questions, but I get it. The elderly citizen, we shouldn't forget about them. Can I go? Yes.
Sure.
Thank you very much, and I just love the presentation so far. My concern, basically more of a contribution of which the European Commissioner has started, looking at the whole thing from the global perspective, with regards to even the ghost workers when it comes to these big techs, data collection and labeling. Of course, when it comes to even ChatGPT, for instance, we know that most of the workers who really give the data or input were in Kenya, and no one talks about it. The underlying factor is that there's a term that in research field we use now called coloniality. And that I would define as the power that constitutes a matrix that operates through control or hegemony over authority, labor, sexuality, subjectivity. If we are able to solve this coloniality in the AI world, we can solve a lot of problems. This has nothing to do with colonialism. I'm using the word coloniality. And again, I also like to say, I think it's time for us to rethink the meaning of good life. We need to have a reverse thinking of the meaning of good life. And I think it could help us rephrase the whole idea of exploitation in labor market, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more, and then we'll get some comments.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'm a lobbyist, and I've worked for many years for large tech companies as a lobbyist in Brussels, and I've seen how much resources they have to influence policy in Brussels. And so my question is more about how do you actually achieve change, and all the proposals that you've talked about today, how do you actually get them to become reality if you have such an imbalance in terms of power, resources, knowledge, mostly in the US, but also in China.
Okay, could I get Valeria to answer the first question, do you think, on the kind of social support? The Evgeny on the second one on the institutionalization of good life, and the Commissioner to talk about tech lobbying. Valeria.
I start, yeah. So the one on the action and activism. Well, I think it's an important point. I think that, certainly there is a space for activism nowadays, and we see it very broadly. I mean, I think we don't have to, go far away from, looking at how people really now react and try to, they go on the street and In some countries a bit less than others, depending on the different sort of situation. And I really do think that trade unions are aware of it. Now, in the, in specific context, now if I look at the platform economy, we do know that, there are at the very moment different tendencies. There are collectives coming, kind of movement bottom up. There is, more top-down sort of approaches. But at the end of the day, we also see that these kind of approaches can converge. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they do. And certainly there is certainly a lot of scope for that. So I would say certainly yes. Let's open the floor for this kind of discussion. Yeah.
Okay, Evgeny, on the humane values and institutions.
Sure. So it will be an indirect answer, but it will maybe clarify what I mean by these new types of institutions. I mean, look, essentially, I think all of us know that there are examples on a daily basis in our own lives of each of us individually or collectively doing something new and creating something and inventing something. We do it all the time. Collaborating with each other, collaborating with the neighbors or with the children or with the parents or just doing it individually. The problem is that the way our institutional landscape looks right now, the only way for this everyday mini innovations to survive and to become shared with others who might benefit from them is by inserting them into the market society, right? It's by inventing an app, submitting that app to an app store, monetizing it, collecting data about the users, and then hoping that there will be venture capitalists who will scale it up, and then other people 5,000 kilometers away from you would be able to reuse those little innovations that you yourself have made. I think that that's a very limited vision of how this everyday creativity of all of us and of society in general can work. In an ideal institutional landscape, the kind of everyday breakthroughs that each of us are capable of, and each of us perform these everyday miracles on a daily basis, and that all of the institutions, cooperatives, NGOs, nonprofits, and others that exist outside of the market sphere, all of the discoveries and innovations and inventions that they do, they would be able to scale up without having to be packaged as a data-sucking app that you will then have to pay €5 for using by relying on Apple, Google, or any of the other platforms. And that should be the task of progressive forces, parties, and trade unions to figure out what this missing ingredient should be for this kind of miracle to occur, because that will fill our life with meaning, that will allow us to collaborate in ways that currently don't exist, because currently, this way of de-alienating our everyday existence is maybe, contributing something to an article on Wikipedia or contributing a line of code to free and open source software. This is great, but we are barely scratching the surface of the kinds of collaborations that will be productive of value, right? We are not talking about doing something extra that will need to cost us. We're talking about things that will be economically significant. Right? But they will be generated through non-market mechanisms and institutions, which we currently do not have, and we badly need them.
Okay. And Commissioner, on the power and even knowledge asymmetry between the big tech companies and the political institutions.
Well, we know that's part of the system all over the world, in our, especially also in our liberal democracies. We all know how Uber organized this referendum in California, this proposal, I've forgotten the number, where they managed at the end to get a majority against the proposal. So this shows how much money is there to be used. This is all the money they do not pay to their workers. They just use this money to establish their position, their market position. So I think this is a reality we have to acknowledge. We had a hearing in the European Parliament on this, similar things, and we see also when we discuss now in the trialogues how positions are influenced. Because, well, obviously there are some kind of hidden agreements and so on with some companies in some member states. So this is unfortunately a reality. And this is a weakness of our democracy, I must say, because we are losing the common good, the common interest, because we believe that this can be better guaranteed by this kind of companies.
So what can we do about that?
Yeah, what can we do? We have to, first, we have to really guarantee transparency. And that's important also that those, the famous people who come out and tell us what happened. This happened with one big transportation company, the whistleblowers. Yeah. We have to guarantee that. This is fundamental. It's only like that that we can discover what is happening behind the scenes. And that means also that we have to have tough rules against this kind of practices. And we have, and that's for civil society, for unions. I have a lot of discussion with the representations, the unions of the drivers, for instance. Well, they are not very powerful in comparison. They have not the millions and millions to spend, but also we have to recognize their role. This is also an aspect of democracy, especially for progressives. We have to recognize their role. Unions, I think they have not yet always understood what's going on in the new economy. Also, if we are talking about rights, about consultation, information, yes, this is quite different from a platform and a normal, so-called normal company. So there is a need for improving the knowledge, the experience to deal with this kind of business models. So this is, I think, an overall approach we need now to keep, not to be against the platform, not to be against these companies. The point is we have to bring these companies in our normal rule. And if they are not, I say it very clear, I told even the CEO of some of them, if you're not capable to function and to work with the normal rules, you can only work if you have dumping salaries, no social protection. Then your business model is just not sustainable. And this is what we have really to make clear.
And we're seeing this played out in Sweden at the moment, aren't we, in the dispute between Tesla and the trade unions there?
Well, I took a very clear, normally the Commission has not to interfere in social conflicts. I had a lot of discussion with the Swedes, you know, when I proposed the minimum wage. And they said, well, you're undermining our Swedish model, which I never agreed with, because it was not to attack their Swedish labor market model. It was to help those who have very low salaries to improve their salaries. It was not against Sweden. It was to help those workers in many other countries where minimum salaries are very low. But here it's an attack from one of the richest, the richest guy in the world, against unions, against a social model which has been accepted by all companies in Sweden, including also Chinese companies, for instance, in the automotive sector, who have accepted the rule, the practice, the tradition in Sweden, how labor relations, industrial relations function. There's a guy coming and saying, no, this is not my, I oppose that. I do not want to fit. He is doing that in Sweden, he is doing that in Germany, where the system is much more based on a legal basis. In Sweden, it's very much general agreement. It's tradition more than legal. And this is just unacceptable. This is just unacceptable. And here we have to set limits also to Mr. Musk.
Mm-hmm. Limits to Mr. Musk. Right. I want another round of questions, yes, please. So.
Yeah, so thank you very much. A great debate. So one maybe reflection is still that I find Europe pretty shy to, you know, say very clearly that yes, we do have the need to create our own technologies in Europe. And I think this is for economic security, industrial competitiveness, democracy and all the issues you discussed. So I think we are still, although we know this is the case, we're still a bit shy to say, no, of course we're going to make these technologies in Europe because we've done this in the previous industrial revolution, and this has to be the case if we want it to be aligned with our norms, principles, needs, and values. So this is the first comment. I'm also very impressed that in the AI Act, there has been so little about work, and that's maybe the question to you. Why aren't the unions involved? Why aren't doctors, educators, people working in all sectors of society that will be highly disrupted by AI involved? And this is maybe also, something for us. We see plenty of civil rights groups and privacy advocates and these kind of organizations, but very little about the social blocks representing society. So are we getting something wrong? Why aren't they on the table? And then finally, just one thing on redistributing value and wealth. So this is a very important point, of course, but we know this is not happening really in terms of wage, but also if we look at the companies' big tech evaluations, we know that, Apple is $3 trillion US dollars. We know that these companies are more powerful than ever, and we see productivity increases, but they get all the benefits and all the rewards. So how do we actually really mandate? For example, have you thought about mandating that the data which is collected in the workplace do not belong to the platforms, but it should be managed as a public good, and unions and public institutions should be accessing these algorithms because we have to inspect if they really, are for the common good and they do collective bargaining and preserve the workers' rights or not. Because this data, we produce it. They don't belong to the actual platforms.
Okay, well, we've got 3 questions all in there. So I'm going to actually get some responses first, and then I'll come back. So, Commissioner, I'm very intrigued by what you would say about the redistribution point, and then we'll come on to the others too. Why don't you mandate that data should be collectively owned?
Well, I think this is the issue, how the gains should be distributed, and how can we have the powers which make it possible that this productivity gains and gains in general are distributed. This is not an easy answer, because these companies have become so powerful now that they are controlling finally the technology. They are controlling many value chains throughout our societies. But that's a question about laws. This is a question about also unions or organizations, and it's clear. Mr. Muskie, what he is doing in Sweden, he says, well, I am the guy, and you are not interfering into my model. And in my model, there's no role for unions. There's no role, and I pay you just what I intend you to pay. So, and this is something we have to defend our model now, and to make sure that this distribution is taking place. But I would not say it's an easy thing. But just one remark on your first question, why Europe? I think we were for too long the last market believers, because the whole economy, the whole Silicon Valley economy is not based really on market. Mazzucato showed how Microsoft and many others, Apple, they got billions of money to develop their technology. It was the profits, privatization, and the losses, and Musk is the best example for that, the best example. So I think now there is an adjustment at the European level, and it's time to do that. And we have discovered also the value of policies, including industrial policies, and I hope that this will allow us at least to reduce a bit the gaps.
Okay, you answered 2 of those questions. Very briefly, Valeria, could I get you to answer the third one? Why was civil society not more involved in the AI Act?
Well, I think it's a big mistake that is not involved, and I think it should be involved. And I also see the point that data should be, should be in fact owned by the people who are producing this data. something which we don't see at the very moment. What we see, again, from a research point of view in manufacturing, we just started a new research project, and we see, in fact, that these data are used for doing what? For, in fact, increasing productivity, enhancing continuous improvement, checking quality, quality assessment, and delivering work intensification. These workers are actually, they have enough. So there is something wrong there, and of course, I want to say, I mean, we do have, because we don't have to forget, in Europe we do have system of industrial relations, if we look at Germany, for example, in the co-determination system, where unions are actually, very much involved. In other countries, of course, that they don't have this system is a bit more, is a bit different. And I think unions should, also in those countries where there is no co-determination, should start to think seriously about technology, to engage in technology, to negotiate about technology, and not only looking at the outcomes of it. So there should be also there a kind of more kind of engagement with this kind of issue. And one point is also, well, it's true that, and I close here, it's true that, absolutely, productivity and wages, this is, the traditional model, right? So you increase productivity, increase wages. But what we see nowadays, particularly is that, and this is, the economy shows that and explains why, the increase in productivity basically is not, kind of recuperated into wages, because simply, you need to wait till the technology becomes more and more stable in order to then see this kind of increase. So I think unions at the very moment are also struggling with that. How can we redistribute? How can we increase wages where we don't see, in fact, now, at this moment in time, increase in productivity? And there should be some sort of backing up.
All right.
I don't know how, but okay, close here.
I am told that Commissioner Schmit has to leave, but before he does, very quickly, I just want to go right down the line, and what is the one recommendation that you would make to transform capitalism in the age of AI in a positive direction? Commissioner.
In 2 minutes.
1 minute.
Well, I think that there's a need for the awareness, a better awareness of what's going on in our economies. I think we are not really aware of the disruptive changes which are going on. That's the first thing. You first have to understand, before then you have to find the solutions. That's the first thing. And then the second one is to define a new balance between market policies and interventions. I think this is something and public intervention, public policies. And third is to build on, in a large sense, more on civil society. I include also unions in the civil society in that sense. I think this is finally the last weapon we have to mobilize civil society for their interest and for the common good. So this is very short and...
Very good. So that's a politician's answer. I asked for one and you give me three. So Evgeny, you are only allowed one.
I'll give you zero as an intellectual. No, so I think ultimately we should be very careful not to glamorize and fetishize the Cold War context that gave us the previous wave of digital innovation. So while it's true what Mazzucaro says about Microsoft and Apple and the billions of dollars that they got from the Pentagon, all of that happened essentially under the context of the Cold War and, in some cases, hot military conflict. I don't think that most of us in Europe want to tie our own innovation engine to another wave of militarism, right? And we have to be very careful to make sure that we leverage one resource that we do have in Europe, which is a strong public sector in education and healthcare and elsewhere. And it has to be the driver of our innovative AI and digital strategy, and not necessarily just the industrial bit of it tied to the military-industrial complex. In one
okay,
way.
great. Valeria, very quickly.
Sorry, I lost myself. So what was the question?
What is the one recommendation you would
One
make?
recommendation. Okay, big question. Well, recommendation would be to me, and I go back to I know, my sounds naive, but to me we are at the point that we need to strongly regulate the market by also perhaps sanctioning those companies, tech companies. Why not, if they don't comply? Getting rid of those, if I look at platforms, that are actually not creating competition, but destroying competition. So let's ban them out of the market. You know, if they are not good for the market, they have to be out. So why not to think about sanctioning? And, you know, and I think that there was also one issue in the discussion on the European Works Council directive, because in fact also there, we saw a lot of companies not complying with the consultation.
All right. Okay.
Exactly.
Excellent. I think we've gone a very long way to solving this issue. I'm now going to ask Maria João Rodrigues, the president of FEPS, to make some concluding remarks. But I also want to thank the panel very much, and we should let them leave the stage and go on to their next important meetings. Thank you.
Let me see if this is working. Is okay? Can you hear me? Look, I hope that you feel the same I feel, is that we went through a fascinating conversation. So many thanks, first of all, to Commissioner Nicolas Schmit, so busy, but with the time to join us for this very interesting conference, and then the speakers and our brilliant moderators. So big thanks, and all of you. The purpose of this conference today is not an easy one. Is to start elaborating on the progressive agenda for capitalism under AI era. Not easy, but extremely important. Let me, first of all, also thanks that we could put this together with the FES Competence Center on the Future of Work, and many other experts and audience which is together with us today, and we go on tomorrow. Let me come with some remarks reflecting our own work into developing a progressive agenda for the digital transformation. First, some theoretical remarks, because Evgeny was going far in his theoretical elaborations, but then I'm jumping to the politics of the digital transformation, and then a particular assessment about what has been done by the European Union and can be done by the European Union with the progressive action. My theoretical remarks are very simple. It's just to recall that we have been through a sequence of inventions of humankind. The first one I'd like to identify is the invention of the market, based on exchange and the division of labor. Then the invention of capitalism, which, as we know, is a systematic way to accumulate wealth, with a particular relationship between capital and labor. Then we move to another thing, which is to put knowledge as the central engine of the accumulation of wealth. This is more recent in our common history. Then fourth invention is to use the digital tools to make it even more powerful. This accumulation of knowledge. And then we came to a sixth important invention, is when these digital tools start to transform everything. So the digital reality is transforming the entire non-digital reality. Virtual reality is taking the lead, is transforming the non-virtual reality. This is what is happening now in front of our eyes. And this is in fact also transforming all areas of our collective life, but all markets also. All markets. I completely agree with the Commissioner. This will change all sectors. We are just at the beginning. And finally, the last invention I'd like to single out is, of course, AI. And again, we can identify different phases. Now we are witnessing the impact of generative AI, but there is a border which remains in our hands, which has to do with our kind of symbolic thinking. And we are very far from this utopian alarmism about general AI. We are still very far from this. Let me underline that all over these steps, yes, we, humankind, we have invented institutions. And institutions are not only about coordinating action, in fact, they are about setting power relationships. And we need always to ask as progressives, who has the power to decide about whatever? This is the critical question for the progressive thinking. Who has the power? So with this theoretical background, I'm now jumping on what really happened about who has the power in the digital transformation. We started with an appealing narrative based on human creativity, so digital transformation as a new era for human creativity, which is also a truth, but is not the complete truth. Because what we saw is that all this transformation was led by an approach which, to be precise, is not only neoliberal, sometimes is libertarian. So is assuming that, yes, we have full consideration for human creativity, but then we don't need rules. And this is libertarian ideology. This is the dominant one so far, and this has channeled the digital transformation in a direction which is now we have some dominant platforms, a few of them, which are part of the infrastructure of the digital transformation. And let us recognize once and for all that platforms are not just technical things. They are institutions. They need to be envisaged as institutions, where again we need to ask, who is in power? And the kind of platforms who now dominate the digital transformation put the power in a few hands, and extract the power from the majority of citizens, consumers and workers. This is what is happening. And this is now in front of our eyes transforming all sectors. All sectors are being transformed by platforms. I just arrived yesterday from China, by the way, where we had a big discussion between Europeans, Americans, and Chinese on the way the global supply chains are now being reorganized. And even we can say that United States, they still have the most powerful platforms, we see the equivalent to the American platforms from the Chinese side. Baidu, Tencent are equivalents of Google and Amazon, and so on. So they have been smart enough to create their own platforms to regain control and national sovereignty on the digital transformation. This is what is happening now in front of our eyes. Well, where is Europe in this story? Europe is not leading in this transformation. We can argue that Europe somehow is leading in the green transformation, is not leading in the digital transformation, is lagging behind. And in the end, I completely agree with the Commissioner Nicolas Schmit. We need to have not just European approach competing with the Chinese or American. What we need to have is an updated global governance setting some common standards. This is now super urgent. But in the meantime, Europe needs to develop its own approach and then to work for global standards and for global governance. So where are we from this viewpoint? Well, I think we need to recognize that over this current legislature, the European Commission and European institutions as a whole, they have made an effort to catch up. We had indeed an intensive legislative work with many pieces. I'm not repeating now the names, everybody knows this. And this is something to be praised, this is positive. But my final argument is that this package so far, with a few exceptions, I'd like to single out particularly the Directive on Platform Work, which is typically a very good social democratic piece. Most of the package which was produced over the last years was driven more by the liberal family in Europe. And that's why we need now to be clear on what can be the difference. We want more than this. And so let me conclude what from my viewpoint, we should want more. First of all, it's not enough to speak about access to broadband. Platforms are also part of the infrastructure. And when it comes platforms, yes, we need to regulate the dominant ones, but we should offer in some certain kind of sectors and activities some alternatives for citizens to choose alternatives with different business models. Second, when it comes AI, there is no possible way for a European approach on AI if there is no European data sovereignty. It's not possible, by definition. So we need to take data sovereignty very seriously. Third, when it comes implications for labor, of course, it's not enough to speak about skills, and that's why this work conducted by the Commission on working conditions is so important. And we know that what is at stake is not only working conditions, is compensation, is participation, and this is also the connection with the social protection and the need to build up a welfare system for the 21st century. And I really agree, also Valeria referred to this, I completely agree. On the one hand, we need to deal with the problem of bogus independent work. But on the other hand, yes, there is independent work, which should also have access to a certain kind of social protection. So this is a big task for progressives to build up a new architecture for a welfare system. Finally, the things I'd like to underline, and the speakers also referred to this, for us progressives, we need also to ask new digital solutions. AI for what? For what kind of goods? What kind of services? This is where we can really make the difference. And by the way, this should be the first question we should address. And from this viewpoint, yes, I also agree with an idea referred that if there is an area where we Europeans, we can build, let's say, a natural competitive advantage when driving digital transformation, is the area of public services, on health, on education, on environmental and urban management. If we regain control of our data, we can have an incredible basis to develop our own AI approach for the digital transformation. So we have a lot of things to do, and I'm sure that we are building a community of thinkers and practitioners which will make this possible for the next period. So let's work together, and many thanks for joining us for this event and the upcoming one tomorrow. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria João, for your closing remarks. I would like to tell everybody there is a reception afterwards. There will be some food and some drink, also to network and to maybe discuss a bit further the food for thought that we just consumed. Also, it was mentioned many times already, tomorrow there's going to be a full day conference in the European Parliament. If you didn't register yet and you want to join, please let us know, because with the security in the Parliament we need to register you in advance. Thank you all for being. Thank you also for the team for helping organize the FES Competence Center for the Future of Work. For myself, also the team from FEPS, there was a lot of work involved organizing this, and tomorrow we have another full day full of inspiring thoughts. So thank you for being here, and please stick around because there's food and drinks for everybody.